We only knocked down the drywall because the studs didn't line up right. If we'd left the wall alone, we never would found the hidden door, the scratch marks covering every inch of that secret room. My wife and I bought a house in rural Pennsylvania a couple years ago. It was built sometime in the early 1900s, kind of old and worn down. But we were looking for a fixer-upper, something affordable that we could renovate over time, just the two of us. We're not professionals or anything, but we're pretty handy. Late that fall, we finally got around to working on this back hallway that led to the basement. There were 2 small closets on either side, and our plan was to open up that space and install some storage cabinets. When I started measuring the studs for the cuts, something felt off. The spacing was weird, not the standard 16 inches apart. At first I thought I just messed up the measurement. I double dash checked, ... and they were definitely off. That whole section of wall seemed thicker than it should have been. Curious, I decided to open a small hole in the bottom corner, just to see what was behind it. The moment I broke through, I noticed the air coming out was cold. It's like not just chilly stale. Still, it didn't feel like a draft from outside. It felt like air that hadn't moved in years. So we kept going, tore off more drywall. Then, that's when we found it. Behind the wall was a door. An old wooden door painted this faded white color like the rest of the house. It didn't have a knob, just a rusted keyhole and hinges that looked like they should have crumbled with one good pull. We checked the original house blueprints we'd pulled from the city when we bought the place. There was nothing there. No mention of any kind of extra room in that section of the house. Just blank space. My wife stood there staring at it. She looked uneasy and said, "Let's just seal it up. Forget it's there." But I couldn't. I had to know what was behind it. I pried the door open with a crowbar. The hinges groaned and resisted, but eventually they gave, and the door creaked open. What we found was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, no windows, no light fixtures, just a concrete floor and a small mattress. It looked like it was meant for a child. No sheets, just stained and old. It was weird enough on its own, but the walls. The walls were what really messed me up. Every inch of every wall was covered in deep scratches, long ones, short ones. Wild, frantic, jagged scratches. Some were down low near the floor. Others were at shoulder height. Few spots had been scratched all the way through the drywall, into the wooden studs underneath. I stepped inside, while my wife stayed back. The air in that room was heavy. It wasn't just cold, it was hard to breathe. My flashlight started flickering, even though I had just changed the batteries. It felt wrong in there. Off. The walls looked warped, like they were bulging in places. Not from water damage, but from pressure. Like something had scratched and clawed at them until the walls literally started to give. And then I noticed the message scratched deep into the far left corner of the wall. "Don't lock the door." I backed out of the room fast. That's when my wife screamed. She was standing at the top of the basement stairs, frozen. She said she heard something below her, under the floorboards like fingernails dragging across wood. Something slow and deliberate. And then ... it stopped. We didn't sleep that night. We dragged an old dresser in front of the door and nailed some plywood over the opening. We told ourselves it was probably nothing, maybe an old storage room someone forgot about, but it didn't stop there. A few nights later, we heard banging coming from inside the wall. It's like real pounding, like someone was slamming their fists from the inside. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the old wood shifting. These were hits, sometimes soft, sometimes violent. I went down with a flashlight to check. Every time there was nothing there. One night around 2 o'clock in the morning, we woke up to our dog whining. She was pawing at the hallway floor near the sealed up wall, not barking, whining, scared. When I picked her up, she peed on me. She'd never done that before. That was it for me. I decided to open the wall one last time. I wanted to see if something had gotten in somehow. I figured maybe a raccoon or something stupid had crawled through. When I pulled the plywood off and pried the door open, the mattress was gone, and so were all the scratch marks. The walls were completely smooth. No carvings, no stains, no damage. Just fresh drywall and paint. But there were footprints, dozens of them, bare feet, small, like a child's, in the layer of dust on the floor, and they were leading out of the room, into the hallway. toward the stairs. I sealed that wall for good the next day. New studs, insulation, plaster, paint. You'd never know a door was ever there. We moved out 6 months later, but I still think about that room sometimes. It's about who it was meant for, what happened there, and why it was hidden. But most of all, I think about those footprints, because I followed them all the way out into the hallway, and I never found any going back in. I only noticed the hole in the ceiling because the bulb kept flickering. But when I looked closer, it was not just a hole, it was a lens. And it was aimed straight at where I sleep. I was 17 when this happened. We had moved into a rental house in upstate New York the year before, old place, cheap, nothing fancy. My bedroom was in the finished basement. It was supposed to be temporary until my sister went off to college. But I kind of liked it. It was quiet, cooler in the summer, and felt like my own space. There was a single ceiling bulb right over my bed, and over the past couple of weeks, it had been flickering on and off. I figured it was just a loose connection or a dying bulb. So, one evening after dinner, I finally grabbed a stepladder and went up to fix it. That is when I noticed the hole. It was not big, maybe the size of a nickel cut into the white ceiling panel right next to the light fixture. But it was clean, deliberate. It did not look like water damage or wear and tear. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized it was not just a hole. There was something inside. Something glassy, almost shiny, just barely recessed. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it up there. It reflected back. It was a lens. I froze for a second. My first instinct was that it was some kind of smoke detector camera, maybe left over from a previous tenant. But it was not in a smoke detector. It was tucked up into the ceiling, hidden, no red light, no blinking. I felt this horrible chill creep over me. Like my whole body suddenly knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. I got down from the ladder and stood on the bed to reach it more easily. I gently pulled at the ceiling tile. It came down with a soft crackle of dust and insulation. The camera, because that is what it was tucked into a small box made to blend in with the insulation. A single black cable snaked from the back and disappeared into the ceiling. I followed it. It ran across the rafters, stapled in places, till it dipped behind the furnace area. The one part of the basement my parents told me never to mess with because of the wiring and pipes, but I did not care. I moved a bunch of old boxes out of the way and crouched behind the furnace. That is where I found it. An old VCR, thick, dusty, but the same black cable was plugged right into the back. And next to it, inside a battered cardboard box, were several unmarked VHS tapes. 6 or 7 of them, each labeled only with numbers, no dates, no names. My hands were shaking at this point. I did not know if I should scream, cry, or just run upstairs and tell my parents. I knew I should, but part of me needed to know, needed to be sure. We still had an old TV with a VHS slot in the living room. My parents were out that night, some dinner with friends. So I brought one of the tapes upstairs. I put it in static at first, then grainy footage, my room, my bed, me sleeping. The footage was time-stamped a few nights ago. I watched for 10 seconds before ejecting the tape, and nearly throwing up. I had not noticed anything. No sounds, no movement, but someone had been watching me sleep, recording it. I ran upstairs and called the cops. My parents came home right as the police arrived. They took everything, the camera, the VCR, the tapes. And here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The officer who took my statement pulled me aside as they were leaving. He said the camera had not just been installed recently. Judging by the dust, the way the cable was run, and how old the tech was, it had probably been there for years, since before we moved in, meaning the people who lived there before us. They were being watched too, and whoever set it up never came back for it. The landlord claimed he had no idea. He was cooperative, shocked, acted horrified, all the things you would expect. But something about the way he asked me if we had touched anything behind the furnace made me wonder. We moved out 3 weeks later. I have not lived in a basement since, and I still think about that lens aimed right at my face every night. I thought I was alone. How long was it recording? How many tapes were there before the ones I found? And most of all, was the person who set it up ever watching live? Because the thought that someone might have been sitting there just out of view, watching in real time, that is what really scares me. We thought it was just a weird draft coming through the basement wall, till we pulled the shelf away and found the hole, and what was on the other side of it. This happened to my family when I was 17. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, in an older 2-story house with a full basement. It wasn't creepy exactly, but the basement had always felt strange. It was unfinished. Just exposed brick and cement walls, old pipes and shelves full of storage boxes that hadn't been touched in years. One day that summer, my parents finally decided it was time to renovate. They wanted to turn part of the basement into a home office and the other part into a den. My dad and I were in charge of clearing out the storage shelves. First, most of which had been pressed up against one specific wall for decades. It was a hot, quiet Saturday afternoon. Dust hung in the air, and every box we opened smelled like old paper and mildew. As we started to move one of the largest shelves, this old wooden one that had probably been there since the 70s, we noticed something odd. The wall behind it didn't match the rest of the basement. Every other wall was bare brick or concrete, but this section had drywall painted the same color as the rest of the room. It looked like a quick patch job, and the paint was slightly off-tone. Even weirder, there were faint marks on the floor. Scratches, like the shelf had been moved in and out of place recently. My dad stood there squinting at it. "That doesn't look original." He knocked on it. "Hollow." He grabbed a crowbar. I remember getting this weird sinking feeling as he pried at the edges. When the panel popped loose with a snap, a gust of cold, musty air hit us in the face. I stepped back, expecting to see maybe a storage cavity or an old crawl space. What we found was a hidden room. No lights, no proper floor. It's just a rectangular space, maybe 6 feet by 8, dug into the foundation. The walls were stone and dirt. It smelled like damp clothes and body odor. And worst of all, someone had clearly been living in there. There was a dirty sleeping bag laid out on a few layers of cardboard. Cans of food, some half-a-tone, an old flashlight, stained pillow, a few yellowed newspapers folded neatly in a stack. On the far wall, scratched into the stone, were dozens of tally marks. Hundreds, maybe more. I stood there, frozen, staring into the darkness of that narrow space. It wasn't ancient, wasn't from some old era. The food brands were current. Flashlight was a newer model, and the dust barely disturbed. Someone had been in there recently. We called the cops immediately. They showed up, took photos, and sealed the space off with crime scene tape. One of the officers asked if we'd seen or heard anything unusual. Footsteps, food going missing, strange smells. My mom mentioned how the basement had always felt cold, even with the heat running. I remembered how for the past few months our cat refused to go downstairs. She used to sleep down there during the day, curled up in the laundry basket. But lately she hissed at the basement door and scratched at it until we let her back up. The most unsettling part was that none of us had ever seen anyone enter or leave. That meant the person, whoever they were, had either snuck in while we were out and hidden for days, or they'd always been there coming and going without us knowing. The cops didn't find fingerprints. They didn't find any ID, phone, or personal items. It's just the sleeping setup, food, and the tallies on the wall. They said it could been a squatter or someone using the crawl space to hide out, maybe watching us, waiting for opportunities. Nothing was taken from the house. No signs of theft, just presence. We sealed that space off again, this time with brick. My dad had a contractor fill it in completely. But even now, I sometimes lie awake thinking about it. Not about who was living there, but about how long they were doing it. How many nights they might have been just a few feet away, listening, breathing, watching. We never heard anything, but they didn't need to make noise. They already knew everything about us. Where we kept the food. When we left, what rooms we slept in. And now every time I walk into a basement, any basement, I find myself staring at the walls just a little longer than I should. Because once you've seen someone live behind one, you can't ever be sure they're not still there. I heard my best friend calling me from thebasement.com, casual, like nothing was wrong. But I'd just come from his room and it was empty. This happened about 4 years ago when I was 15. My best friend Alex had invited me over for a weekend sleepover at his place. We'd known each other since we were kids, and his house was like a second home to me. It was an older place. 2 stories, creaky floors, and a half-finished basement his parents mostly used for storage. It always felt colder than the rest of the house, even in summer. That Friday night started normal. We played video games, ordered pizza, and stayed up watching dumb horror movies. Around 1:30 a.m., I started getting tired. Alex, though, wanted to grab some snacks before crashing. He said he'd run downstairs to the kitchen and grab chips, and asked me to stay in his room and queue up another video. So I did. I stayed in his room, lying on the floor, scrolling through YouTube. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I figured he probably got distracted. His family had a habit of leaving half-unpacked boxes everywhere in the kitchen, and he had a bad habit of forgetting what he was doing. So I got up and went to check. That's when I heard it. From the top of the stairs, just outside his room, I heard him say, "Hey, come down here real quick." It was definitely Alex's voice. Calm, clear, slightly amused, like he found something funny. But it was coming from the basement, not the kitchen. I stood at the top of the stairs, confused. "Alex," I called out. There was a pause. Then I heard him again. "Yeah, I'm down here. Just come look at this." Something about the way he said it didn't feel right. His tone was off. Not totally unnatural, but just a little too smooth, like someone imitating him. I hesitated, then called again, louder. "Where are you?" Another pause in the back, near the shelves. "Just come down. Here's the part that still messes with me." Alex didn't have a finished basement. It was cluttered and dimly lit, full of dusty furniture and old seasonal decorations. He hated going down there, and we joked dozens of times about how creepy it was. So why would he suddenly be waiting for me down there in the middle of the night? Still, I started walking down the stairs. Each step creaked. The air felt colder with every foot I descended. When I reached the bottom, the only light came from a bare bulb over the washing machine on the far wall. "Alex?" I called again. No answer. The basement was quiet, still. I started walking slowly toward the shelves in the back, weaving past boxes and an old recliner. That's when I heard it again, my name, spoken just behind a stack of crates. I turned the corner and found a small black tape recorder resting on top of a wooden crate. Its little wheels were spinning, rewinding. I stared at it for a second, then it clicked. That voice, the one that had been calling me, it wasn't live, it was a recording. I didn't even have time to react, because just as I reached to stop the tape, I heard footsteps directly behind me. Slow. One step, then another. I turned around, heart pounding, and there was Alex. But he wasn't saying anything. He was just standing there, staring at me. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. "Dude, what the hell was that? Was that you?" He didn't answer. "Seriously, that voice? The recorder? Did you do that?" He just kept staring at me, then tilted his head slightly. I took a step back, "Alex." Finally, he spoke. "You heard it too." His voice sounded flat, hollow, like he was forcing it through a tight throat. Yeah, it was you, right?" I asked. He blinked slowly. "I've been upstairs the whole time." "No, you haven't," I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't so sure. Then he said something that chilled me worse than the basement air. "I thought you were still in my room, but I heard you call my name from down here." We both stared at each other. Then at the recorder, which had begun to rewind again on its own. Neither of us touched it. Alex finally reached out and pressed the stop button. We didn't say anything else. We just bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and locked it. That night, neither of us slept. We stayed in his room with the lights on, pretending to scroll our phones, but really just listening. Listening for any sound of footsteps on the floorboards below. The next morning, we told his parents. They were weirded out, but chalked it up to kids being kids. Alex swore he didn't record anything, and I know I didn't. His dad tossed the recorder in the trash, and we didn't talk about it much after that. But a few months later, I got a Snapchat from Alex. It was a picture of his basement door cracked open. The caption read, "He played it again last night." The light bulbs in our basement would flicker every now and then, but the night they shut off for good. I wasn't alone down there. I was 16 when my mom and I moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of a sleepy Ohio town. Money was tight, and my mom jumped at the chance to rent a place with a finished basement that I could turn into a makeshift bedroom. At first, I loved the privacy. The space felt like my own little cave. It had that weird old house smell-damp cement mixed with cardboard and something metallic. The room had a carpet and a tiny bathroom with a moldy mirror and flickering fluorescent light. But what bothered me the most was the main bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was one of those old pull-string kinds with no wall switch. Even when we replaced the bulb, it would flicker randomly. I chalked it up to faulty wiring. One night around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed playing music through my phone when I noticed the bulb humming. It wasn't just flickering anymore. It was vibrating, buzzing with this low-pitched electrical sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Then it popped. The room went pitch black. I sat up immediately, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone to turn on the flashlight. I thought I heard something shift in the corner of the room. Just a creak. Maybe the ceiling settling, but the air felt different, heavier. I decided to grab a replacement bulb from the storage closet down the hall. But before I could even reach the closet door, I heard something soft, like feet shuffling behind me on the carpet. I spun around, shining my phone light across the room. Nothing. Just shadows. I turned back toward the closet and noticed something strange. The door, which I hadn't even opened yet, was cracked. I slowly pushed it open with my foot. The air inside was cold. I raised my flashlight and nearly dropped it. Every bulb we had ever replaced was hanging from the ceiling on strings. About a dozen of them, all at different lengths, swaying slightly, like some kind of light graveyard. I stumbled back, and that's when I heard breathing. Behind me, slow and wet. I turned and shined my light toward the bed. No one. Then the closet door slammed shut on its own. I bolted upstairs barefoot and didn't look back. My mom didn't believe me until she saw the closet the next morning. We moved out by the end of the month.